Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Halina Siwolop SDSA. Today, I'm pleased to welcome set decorator Alison Harvey SDSA to discuss her exquisite set decoration on the Netflix hit series, The Crown. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for asking. It's a great privilege.
I have to say that I'm so glad that I'm the one interviewing you, as not only is the show one of my favorites, and I watch every single episode, but I've always been so curious and wowed by the design and the decoration that you guys provided. So I have lots of questions for you today.
Okay, brilliant.
So let's just start at the very beginning with a basic question and how you came to work on the project. And was this your first time working with Martin Childs, the production designer?
It was, yeah. I mean, I had just finished Beauty and the Beast as a job with Sarah Greenwood and Kate Spencer, the amazing pair they are. And I was just wrapping, and then Celia Bobak, another amazing set decorator, rang and said, I need some help. So I went on initially for 2 weeks. 2 weeks into filming, it became really quickly apparent to Celia it had been billed as a sort of a small television production. So the crew was her, a buyer, and two other, an assistant and a petty cash buyer. I think no one realised the sort of filmic scope and the ambition of that project until they sort of got going, and then it just became a real beast, I think. So I literally came on for 2 weeks, and then I was still there 7 years later. So I sort of took over from Celia because she wanted to go back and do film. So Martin very nicely just asked me if I wanted to do it, and of course I wanted to do it. So yeah, I hadn't worked with him before, but we have a really great chemistry together and make each other laugh a lot. So it was a really, really great serendipitous moment for me.
That's great when you can laugh through the hard times, right? Because we all have them.
Definitely. Yeah, you really need some sense of humor.
Absolutely. So you were saying that you guys noticed that the scope of the work really was more than anyone anticipated. So did your crew grow in size to reflect the needs?
It did every year. I think in season 2, the producer came up with a bright idea of running 2 full shooting crews at once to get through the material quicker. But obviously, you can sort of duplicate to some extent the shooting crew, but you can't necessarily duplicate the people at the top of the triangle. So I know Martin and costume and myself and makeup. So those creatives sort of found that very complicated to try and keep on top of. So yes, every year the crew had to evolve and grow to accommodate literally the amount of material we were trying to cover. Oh. They'd employed Martin as a film designer to have film ambition, so which he brought. But so he'd go into a massive empty house and offer it up as yes, this is going to be this. And so then we just had an awful lot of material to cover in a short space of time. So it was quite a challenge, and the crew had to grow to reflect that. So we were very lucky that Netflix, the budget, allowed us to expand at all, because often jobs don't allow you to employ anybody else because the budgets are so restrictive. So we were very lucky.
Yeah, that's when you stop laughing, right? When they're so restrictive.
Exactly. When you really stop sleeping, it's never good.
Exactly. Well, it was shot so beautifully. It is definitely so cinematic. Did you interact a lot with the director of photography, the cinematographer? I'm sure you guys had lots of discussions.
Absolutely. I mean, I love a lamp. Don't we all love a lamp? So he was particularly Adriana Goldman, who was sort of the lead DP, I guess, for the whole of the seasons. He was very keen on shears in the windows to give a lovely diffused light. I mean, and without lighting, you're lost, aren't you? So his lighting was absolutely beautiful. So everywhere has shears, whether you liked it or not, and everywhere has lots and lots of lamps. So a lot was lit by practicals when it's very dark palaces at night. And yeah, so we just had a lot of conversations and brought in as much as we could to sort of supplement what he brought out of vision. I've always said that the lampshades are one of those key indicators of era.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go through it really, nothing much changes in the palaces really, because it's all inherited ancient antique furniture that no one chucks out and changes really. So anything that does change is literally the fabric on the sofa and the lampshade. So it goes from the sort of the wasted shapes in the 40s and then goes through the big sort of cylindrical, slightly more American for Margaret. We had the more American big long drum shades that are a bit more mid-century American, more than they were here, because Britain was very slow to get classy in the 50s, unlike America. And then into the 60s, you know, how the shapes change really, that, and then into Diana's 80s, this kind of these weird frilly ruched bottoms. So I was all up for bringing in as many lamps as possible. You know, sometimes too many, but maybe, you know.
Well, it's very interesting because you're absolutely right. Lampshades can tell a whole story of where you are in what period. Having gone through so many different periods, you really had to be on top of it. And
yes, we had, I mean, I had a whole folder of lampshades. You know, we had the whole of our prop room, the whole ceiling, because I had to buy and make so many. The whole of the ceiling of the prop store was just a big lampshade ceiling. 6 decades of style, basically. Yeah.
that's amazing. So speaking about all the periods, and here you are, you're designing a historical drama.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that you would start with a lot of research, and not being from England and not being as versed in the royals and palace decor and all. Where do you go to find that research? And were you able to find research on some of the more private spaces? And was that, you know, did you have room for creative license?
Yes, all of that. I mean, I think I, having worked with Sarah and Katie for 20 years or something on mainly period productions, I have visited a lot of stately homes, and I have to say, the geeky person I am, I go in my spare time as well. So very luckily on those kind of location scouts, you do end up down the back pantry of, you know, some obscure stately home to see how that life is lived. And more often than not, it's an amazing castle, but everyone's living in a tiny, slightly modernized kitchen at the back, where it's actually the only warm part of the stately home, because everything's so drafty and cold. So I have sort of had a sort of glimpse into the sort of the aristocratic UK upper class, I suppose, and what happens in the sort of the private elements. We didn't have any access to any, obviously, the royals' real apartments, but that was a sort of an extrapolation on my part of what I had seen that was real, and sort of imagining our best guess of what their apartments might be like within the context of where they registered in which era.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I watched every documentary there was to watch. My husband was like, I can't watch any more royal documentaries, please. You know, when we finished finally, he's like, oh, thank God. It's just because I was quite obsessive about it. I did watch and I read autobiographies. We always had an amazing visual research department who created this extraordinary document at the beginning of each season, which sort of pertained to each episode and storylines, and gave a kind of précise snapshot of the time, but you still wanted to kind of go into it at as much detail as you could yourself to kind of get any little tidbits of characterization that you could somehow bring in, because it's very hard. They have a very sort of surface life, it seems, when they're presented, because everyone tidies up after them. They've got a very ordered, public-facing interior. So it's quite hard to sort of make them messy and layered, because there's servants everywhere. So we definitely did try our best to be honest and honourable to the truth and what that truth would believably be, I suppose.
Is there, you were mentioning about like character and then all these details. And so was there one set
Mm.
and one character that you felt you were able to really expand upon? Or who was your favorite
I mean,
character?
I really loved Margaret's world, and I really loved Diana's world. They're kind of, I mean, I think generally it's a bit like buying presents for men at Christmas, isn't it? Women are sort of a bit easier to sort of kind of imagine. I don't know. Diana was great because it was a whole set. We started from scratch. There had been some photographs that her butler had taken illegally after her death and then published in the newspapers. There were some images of what the inside of her Kensington Palace looked like. So that was a good starting point, which gave us the palette, which was this kind of mid-80s terracotta sands, pale baby blues. And then I kind of found some obsolete wallpaper. It's always, whenever I try and buy any fabric or wallpaper for the Crown, it's always just been discontinued because we're always slightly out of period. Whatever we want is never quite on trend. So this is Margaret's palette. This is the 60s palette that we had for her Kensington Palace, which was a bit more Americanized, I suppose, a bit more glamorous. She was fun to do. So this is what we started with. That was the empty location, and then we brought in all of the interior. So she was fun to do because she had a more American glamorous, just outside the royal family. So that was a fun set to do, and she was just kind of a bit wild and fun. So she was a really lovely set to play with.
Right.
So
And there are those lampshades you were talking about.
yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Bit of English and a bit of American.
I really loved her set. I thought it was a really good reflection of who she was.
And this is Tony Armstrong. This is the husband's. So he was even more kind of on the pulse of London cool. So this was supposed to be, next level. So hers was sort of 60s aristocratic, and his was 60s beatnik, kind of, I'm a photographer. Yeah, so that set was fun. Yeah.
I love the color you're using there, the fabric on the curtains. Amazing. Very well
Yeah,
done. I love it.
it's quite bold for the Crown, but it was really fun to be able to be a bit more cool for sure, because it's not cool mostly.
With that set, you feel like you really step outside the palace, like that's its own entity.
Absolutely. And I think that was important for the storyline because she was bucking against the restrictions and the stifling nature of her upbringing and trying to live a life and treading quite a dangerous world, which sort of, her excesses. It was supposed to sort of demonstrate her excess and her difference from the Queen. So when the Queen comes into these sets, it's a really, really quite a different environment from the sort of the tweedy tartan that we usually have the Queen in. So
it's gorgeous. So how many of these sets were built? How many were locations? I know that's, you don't have to give me a number, but like, did you build most of the stuff or were you out a lot dressing various locations?
it was quite a mix. I mean, we redressed the breakfast room 38 times as different sets, I think. So if they wanted to kind of save some money, or make things logistically easier, then Martin would say, well, I think we just do a revamp on the breakfast room, which is a sort of Georgian double cube sort of proportion, very kind of elegant, classic space. But then we'd have to just think, oh God, I've got to make it into Polo Club now, or it's got to become someone else's bedroom, or, it was very versatile, but it did mean that there was a lot of head scratching about, what should we do with this now? But I think we went out, some of the really, really amazing locations we would never be able to build. So some of them I think you'll probably see in other UK-based dramas, so there are about 4 or 5 stately homes that people tend to go to because they are such extraordinary pieces of architecture with beautiful gilt. So our kind of sort of linchpin pieces, a lot of those are locations which we did repeat visit, but then within each season there would be really big storylines that involved Egypt or the American tour or things where we had to literally just kind of start from scratch, like an empty shell, which we would then have to dress. So
these estates that you were talking about, are they normally empty? And so you have to go in and, or do you have to?
A bit of both. I mean,
Bit of both.
there was one that said, "Oh, you can use everything in here." And I was like, "Well, we'll bring some bits, but thanks very much." You know, because they had, you know, original Meissen porcelain, because they were because the aristocracy of Britain, if they actually live in a building which they've lived in family-wise for generations, they're very, very dismissive about a Meissen. So they're like, yeah, you can use that, no problems. But then I turned up and they'd taken everything away. So someone else had come in and gone, no, you can't leave the Meissen out. So we often brought everything because, as you know, a film crew is a clumsy entity. So a lot of these things we just brought our own just to facilitate the shooting crew, I think, for safety.
What an undertaking. And where are you acquiring all your set dressing? Are you buying? Are you renting? Is it a mixture of both?
A bit of everything. I mean, we are fortunate to have some really great hire companies, which for the speed with which we have to, the schedule demanded the number of sets, a lot was hired, but we did literally run out of things to hire. So I would always buy really from the off as much as I could at auction, which we would then either reupholster or French polish or gild, or some of it was a reproduction. But I used to try and buy as much as I could that was an original, authentic antique of the era, because it just had a lovely patina. And sadly, or not sadly, luckily for us, a lot of that is really unfashionable now. So palaces have a lot of Georgian furniture, and Regency furniture, because everything's sort of mid-century modern now. No one really wants to buy that. So it's actually relatively affordable to buy something from, 1720 for a couple of £100. So yeah, I mean, the prop store was absolutely packed. I think we had like 11 or 12 containerfuls of furniture, drapes, graphics, plus 3 prop stores, mountains of smalls. I mean, a whole store was dedicated to tech through the ages. We had shelves and shelves and shelves of telephones from 1950 onwards, and then televisions from 1950 onwards, and then hi-fi. So yeah, we had, there you go.
That's a great photo.
I mean, that was sort of, because again, like the lampshades, that was a really key. They were always on the phone, so whatever there was next to their head was a real key. If it was the color, the shape, whether it indicated that they were, like the Queen had the same one from 1955 till she died, or it just did ring a kind of have an impact in terms of locating us historically, and that was really important. So we did have a proper forensic timeline of all these kind of really odd, boring things.
Talk to me a little bit about the Queen's world and kind of how you styled her design, and kind of where you went with that process.
She sort of spends her time between four palaces. So she has Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Balmoral, and Sandringham. So Sandringham is sort of mossy and a lighter, relaxed sort of home. Balmoral is baronial and sort of tartan. Windsor's Gothic, and then Buckingham Palace is gold and French. That was sort of, broadly speaking, how I separated them up, because each location was so disparate. So Buckingham Palace might have had, I think, sort of 6 or 7 different locations and sets. So it was quite important. I mean, obviously, Martin did an amazing job in the first place, finding the geography of how these places tied. So the Queen walks out of one room in London and walks out in Scotland, or whatever. So these locations had to sort of meld.
Well, it's really seamless. I mean, you obviously curated your color palettes, and like you said, you have all these different locations, but it's really seamless. It's and really quite lovely.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well, it's an amazing team of people trying to do that.
I love the coziness of Balmoral.
Yes, I think it's because it's her private. It's where the Queen loved Balmoral. I think that's, because it was an estate in the middle of nowhere, and it was her holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have tartan everywhere, which, you think surely it hadn't actually got tartan everywhere, but it actually does have tartan everywhere. So this is a nice set. This is one we did at the beginning of season 6. and that's Queen Victoria as a girl, as a portrait. So that's a kind of nod to her. And then everything in here is sort of tartan, a lot of tartan things in here. Because it's where she has a break, it needs to feel warm and, well, warm and comforting, I think, and where she's relaxed most.
And I think going back to that warmth, and I mean, all of the sets, you guys have a really great blend of texture and colors and pattern. And it all just makes it so believable. It's like historical layers and things that have been up for 100 years or more or whatever. And then you're just adding it all looks so beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. This is actually one of the breakfast room redresses, this one.
I would never have noticed.
Doesn't go anywhere when you go off there, doesn't go anywhere. So yes, it was really fun. Yeah, I liked that set. It was nice.
And did you have to work closely with the costume designer as far as color palettes and coordinating the colors?
Every season, they were absolutely lovely costume designers. Really loved them. So every season we go in at the beginning and they'd have a rail of just to sort of look at the palette, really. So Margaret was always kind of aubergines and peacock blues, and then the Queen was always soft and mossy. Well, she had a sort of country palette, a bit like my, the Sandringham, the different palettes. She had a kind of country palette and a work official palette. And her dresses are always extremely vibrant so that she can be spotted in a crowd. That's the kind of the logic behind it. So often their choice of colour would be led by the historical research, which was, for instance, Aberfan or Charles and Camilla's wedding. They copied an interpretation of what she actually wore according to the historical research.
Let's talk a little bit about the final episode and some of the sets that you had in there. And the first thing that got me, not the first thing, but, Diana passes away, what is it, 1997? Was that a challenge to decorate? I always think, what is 1997?
Yes, actually, it was. Because you sort of have a sense of each decade as it gets a little further away in time. You have a sort of, it has an identity. So you get to sort of the 70s, 50s, I know that, 60s, 80s. When you start to look at it, it looks a lot like the 70s. Everything takes a really long time to catch up and have its decade identity. But the 90s, I felt, sort of start to move into sort of that kind of cream linen, wood, natural. It had a kind of naturalism that kind of reacted against the sort of the 80s and 70s, quite brash sort of color sort of. So it went into a much softer world. And then there's a kind of a generalization of design that seems to happen sort of 1990s onwards that sort of seems to last for a really long time before you get into the postmodern, the 70s retro look, which is prevalent now. It seems to that sort of mass production of interiors and enjoyment of interiors just made everything a bit more IKEA mass produced, I suppose. So that's that. Anyway, that's what I felt. It became a kind of naturalism, a sort of woods and creams is what I kind of eventually concluded that it was.
Was that kind of the design process behind the Ritz where they stayed? Because
yeah, absolutely,
that very cream. And
it was. I mean, I looked at the Ritz. We bought books on the Ritz, and then it was really, really pale. Actually,
you were able to weave in so much texture and pattern, though. It's really nice. So even though it is the creams and
this blue stripe seemed to be quite a big thing in Diana's. I tried to carry that through because that was this kind of Ralph Lauren stripe. It was big on the yacht. She seemed to wear it. So I wanted to bring that in. And it just felt very much of that era and very Ritz. So we did try and combine quite a crazy selection of patterns here, but the curtains actually in the Ritz were quite crazy too. So I was just trying to sort of honor that lunacy, really, but in an elegant way. So
they help anchor the room so well with that pattern and those little bits of blue, and they're beautiful.
The funny thing about this set was this furniture was found in a junk shop in South London by one of the prop men, and it is actually the Ritz furniture from the London Ritz. They basically doing a revamp, so they sold off all their real furniture. So we reupholstered everything, but the actual underneath it says London Ritz on all the chairs and all the consoles. I mean, not the French. I bought in the other sort of the more period French dark furniture, but the cream painted furniture was all actually out of the real London Ritz, hilariously. So you can't get much more authentic than that, can you?
Not at all. So speaking of like reupholstering and your drapery and everything, was it difficult to find fabrics that reflected that time period?
Yes. Same as the wallpaper. Everything was just been discontinued. It was actually really quite hard to find something that felt really of that era. It was interesting. We were always just slightly ahead or behind.
Did you manufacture any of your fabric? And also, I see big, beautiful rugs everywhere. Did you have to find them? Did you print anything?
We printed quite a lot, actually, for the same reason. And some of the fabric was woven for us. There's an amazing mill in Italy who I had a tiny scrap of gold damask, and he managed to color match it and use a traditional damask design to kind of replicate this fabric that I'd found that I wanted to put on the chairs. So they wove over the seasons. They wove some bespoke stuff that we needed that again we couldn't find. So there's some things from the 60s world that we couldn't really find in the right colorway, and they did an amazing job in a sort of traditional silk weaving way. And then we had the sort of more modern techniques where we'd literally design it and print the carpet. So for the last sequence where Charles and Camilla are married and the Queen walks down and looks at her coffin, that was a carpet that we printed to replicate the chapel at Windsor that we couldn't film in. So that had to be quite a close match because we were trying to literally, as best we could, replicate that whole set, but somewhere else. So
I was going to ask about that because I noticed that beautiful rug, and this is the model. This is beautiful too.
I mean, I think actually this model might be my favorite thing we managed to create almost ever, because it's so hard, but the actual effect of it was so gorgeous in the end and so sort of resonant. So I start off by buying all the model lead figures I could on eBay all around the world. I bought all these figures, and that's my desk. That's where I started with my eBay, and they were like, "It's not enough." We're all just, oh God, because more. And then Stephen George was on, and I want it to be longer and bigger, and it's got to replicate it has to replicate exactly the funeral procession. So then we ended up having to scan people in costume and then 3D shrink them and then 3D print them so that we had all the right regiments and all the right sort of uniforms. So this model was a massive undertaking. We're gonna need a bigger boat. So
how long did it end up being? How big?
The actual model?
Yeah.
I think it's 40 foot. I think we had about 3,000 figures in the end. And so the ones we had to 3D print were all hand painted. It was beautiful actually in the end. I really, really loved that, to be honest.
I thought it was stunning, and I love the way the lights light up.
We had to hire in our replica crown jewels to scan those and miniaturize the crown jewels. So it was sort of a big world made miniature. It was, I mean, it was fun. Yeah.
So let's go back to the chapel. And you said that was a set within a location?
Yeah. So Martin found a cathedral in the north of England that had the right sort of scale and architecture to feel like it could potentially be a substitute for Windsor, but it was twice the size that we needed it to be. So we had to create a false sort of rood screen altar area that Hannah, the amazing art director, sort of designed and oversaw the building of. So this whole wall at the back was a construction build, and then we brought everything in. So that this altar cloth was hand painted by this amazing artist again, to copy what's really in St George's Chapel at Windsor. And then this is the carpet that was printed. So we were doing our best to replicate. So there you can see the rest of the cathedral beyond. So we were just blocking off halfway down so that it became the right proportion for us. So that's the real location. And then you can see our sort of trompe-l'oeil paintings. So that's it. Yeah, that's it in kind of progress.
Beautiful.
So from a distance, I think we sort of got away with it.
It works for me. I think it's great.
It's as long as you don't sort of, as a backdrop to the rest of the action, Yeah.
Well, it really looked regal. I thought it was really amazing. Was this one of your bigger challenges?
And we only had a day or a day and a half to get it in. So it was, I think a lot of the things in the crown are logistically complicated for the time you've got available to achieve it. I think that's possibly one of the most complicated things. I mean, all the sets are really lovely to do. It's just you've got to really do it quickly.
Did you say a day and a half to get that
Yeah,
ready? Yeah.
yeah.
I always ask this question. Were your flowers real or were they silks?
Always real. Yeah. Well, where possible. Yeah. I mean, if we're in a set on and off where the schedule changes and we're in there for a while, then we'd probably get some artificial, but we're only in there for a day. So
Right.
yeah.
You just want to do real. They look so
Real
beautiful.
is nice, isn't it? If
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So what other big challenges other than, or what other joys? Like I know you had a tight schedule. I saw a picture of your calendar and your shooting days. So those were packed
Yeah.
full. I was like,
There
oh,
you go.
I know this job.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's literally pick it up, dress it, shoot it, take it. It was a day dress, usually shoot it for a day at most, and then it would strike it. So doing that for 8 months with 2 units going, I mean, it's kind of logistically quite challenging, I think. So that's why you need enough people to be in all those different places at once. But yeah, that was quite intense.
So having been on the project from pretty much the start, right? What was your favorite era to decorate?
I mean, I have to say, I did love Margaret's American tour. Britain was so drab after the war and stayed really drab. Any sort of foreign filming, anything that's hot in the Crown, we go to Spain. So when everything looks, sunny, we're usually in Spain pretending it's somewhere else, like Egypt or Greece or wherever it's sunny is Spain. But Margaret's world was just, it was just fun to get out of that dreary, gloomy Britain and have some fun with a sort of slightly more glamorous woman character in a more glamorous world, really. So yeah, I loved all her world, and I really loved Diana's world again, because that was a complete, we could construct that set from scratch. So you could go in and interact in whatever way you wanted, choose all, quite keen on that kind of subliminal stuff in her set. So that was great fun to do. All the pictures were of lonely women. So they're all kind of isolated, melancholy women. I guess what the contrast was between her world and Charles's world, which I really liked. So Charles was all about sort of 18th century toile, architectural, classical monuments and sort of olive drab colours. And hers was a sort of innocent, sort of joyful, until it went wrong, but, kind of an innocent, unsophisticated, more fashion-led kind of human warmth that she had. So this is Charles's world of sort of classical sobriety, I suppose. So he was also a bit of a hippie, though. So actually he's got touches of sort of the Killim, and this is kind of classic English stately home where all the chairs are knackered and baggy. And Charles and Camilla world, I liked that sort of element where it's all about the dog on the sofa, and everything is a bit just relaxed country living. So that's sort of his world with her, and then his office was more to do with his classical sophistication. I think he sees himself as quite an intellectual polymath. So there were lots of classical allusions in here, and architecture and chess and the antiquity and gardening and all the things that I sort of know that he is interested in. So I used to try and bring in as much of that as I could where we could. This was Harry's room in Highgrove. So that's the kind of trying to do a teenager's bedroom in a stately home, because you can't really interact with the walls. So we put the drapes up, trying to feel sort of quite oppressive. It's basically he's sort of living on the surface of Charles's. It's not really his home anymore. His mother's gone. He doesn't want to be there. So it was trying to be in it, but on it, without living. He didn't feel like he wanted to be there or lived there, really. So, and then again, trying to bring in some of that 90s flavor, I suppose, with the stripe. And there's this William's room, which had a bit more optimism. And that whole episode is to do with their sort of beginning of their sort of fracturing brotherly relationship. And William kind of sort of maturing into another, him sort of seeing the succession and Harry being the rebel, I suppose. So it was trying to dress something that felt like a tangible teenager's room in a stately home. So
again, I love all the mix of patterns and colors and textures.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's a lot cleaner than my teen's room. That's all I'm going to say.
This is the kind of the party room in the base. So the location where we actually film, which is a stately home, actually has got this red painted basement for parties. So we used the red that was there. The snooker table had to have a covering on it because they pour beer all over it. But anyway, so we dressed this as a bit of a den, bit of a party den, which again was quite fun for a change. That kind of contrast in that final episode, that last party sequence, that kind of aristocratic bedlam of the fancy dress party where it all goes a bit awry compared to the composure of the wedding. I like that kind of contrast that we had visually between those two storylines. It was fun.
I don't know how you tackled all this. You must have had an impressive team. And
absolutely amazing team. Yeah, very lucky.
Were you able to go out to all the locations, or did you just have to like delegate it out to people?
Well, I would always go to start with because different people had different sort of strengths. So you sort of want to know who had the right eye for that location or the right level of detail for that location. So yeah, I'm afraid Anna Page was brilliant at tech and offices, so she would quite often go and do things like the TV studios. And then, I mean, everyone, it was Sophie and Carolyn and Naomi and Anna, who were all brilliant assistants who just went off and really did amazing jobs. So yeah, I was really, really lucky to have such a great team.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to add about this project, and or how is it coming to the end of such a monumental project?
Well, I think when the Queen died, it really was a bit of a moment where it just sort of felt a bit pointless. It was really quite odd having sort of, what was amazing about the project was actually looking at my own life through history. So it kind of, I mean, not back to 1940s, but it's sort of you start to look at and study British history and world events through this kind of medium of a script and do the research around it. And that was really fascinating to sort of travel history over those decades, and great fun, actually. So I just feel very lucky. It was a really great series to work on. I'm very, very lucky, actually. So,
well done. That's all I'm going to say to you and your team. Very well done. So, Alison, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really interesting. I loved hearing your creative insights into the wonderful world of The Crown. And it's been really such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.